Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, and if you're not, why not? Click that QR code, we'll subscribe you to the channel. You will know that this channel is very much a retro channel, a look at retro TV, retro films, a smattering of new bits and pieces. Today I'm talking about a series that I wouldn't have watched if it had not been recommended to me by several of my loyal viewers. So I'm indebted to you, whoever you are. I can't remember who it was, but there's certainly a couple of you who recommended this series to me. And that's one of the things I really like now about this channel. I'm covering lots of the shows that I watched and loved when I was a kid and reminding a lot of people about things they may have forgotten. But you're reminding me or telling me about things I didn't know. Because my frame of reference, certainly as far as kids' TV is concerned, is the 60s into the mid-70s. In the late 70s, I started working. So I wasn't keeping my eye on the ball as far as kids' TV is concerned. And why should I? Because the shows being made and screened then were aimed at a different generation and a different demographic. So whilst I might have known vaguely about some of the shows that were on, there were some which I missed. And the show I'm talking about today is called Noah's Castle, and I've watched it, and quite frankly I'm stunned. Let's talk about it. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. I'm filming in my office room in the house again today, mainly because it is absolutely pouring down with rain outside, and I just couldn't be bothered to get wet walking into the garage / cinema room where I usually record. So I hope that this will suffice for this particular video. I won't be here for long, just this video, maybe one other. Noah's Castle was a series which I think I might have heard of, but didn't know anything about because, as I said, I wasn't really involved in the world of children's TV in the late 70s into the 80s because I was in work, and it just wasn't on my radar. If I know of the series at all, I quite possibly confused and conflated it with another series that was aired in 1977, an HTV series called King of the Castle, which I believe was written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, Doctor Who's Bristol Boys. So Noah's Castle sort of was very much on the periphery of my memory or knowledge. It's not a show I'd seen or was aware of. So when I was recommended it, I did a little bit of research on it and thought, this sounds interesting. This sounds very interesting. And wow, it certainly is. It was made by Southern TV, a 7-episode series. It was produced and directed by Colin Nutley. It was written by Nick McCarty based on a book by John Rowe Townsend, which had been released a year earlier, and the show was made in late 1979 and screened in April and May 1980. This is a series that really, I think, says all that needs to be said about the 1970s and the stark differences between children's TV in the early 70s and children's TV in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think, in fact, it also sums up the huge difference between the 60s and the 70s themselves and the type of entertainment that was being made, the type of shows that adults and children were watching. The 1960s and the early 70s had been characterised by a lot of optimism, enthusiasm, bright primary day-glow colours in lots of shows, exciting adventures with characters like the Tomorrow People, the next stage of human evolution, who seemed to offer a brighter tomorrow for the human race. And we had master illusionist Tarot with his extraordinary, eerie adventures in Ace of Wands. And even the high-powered hijinks of the Freewheelers, who I covered in a video last week. Go take a look. They all seem like the product of a completely different time and a completely different society. It's quite amazing how culture and a society can change and shift across the space of a handful of years. Noah's Castle then aired in 1980. That reflects the world coming out of the 1970s, a decade of misery, strikes, recession, unemployment, 3-day weeks, power cuts, things that those of us of a greater age will remember only too well. It's a very grey, drab period. We think of the 60s as a time of free-thinking idealism, the permissive society, and explosion of post-war freedom and expression and imagination, whereas the 70s, I think those of us who lived through them will think of them and remember them largely as cold and brutalist, grey and industrial and joyless and troubling. Noah's Castle, I think, sums up the entire decade in a way in this dystopian story which depicts the slow, dreary and rather shameful collapse of the social order, food shortages, hunger, unrest, urban decay. It's uncompromising and it's a deeply pessimistic story of one family trying to raise itself out of the madness and the disaster. In amongst the families, that's expressed in many different ways. Noah's Castle really is as far away from the jolly hockey sticks cheeriness of early 1970s fantasy adventure series for kids as it's possible to imagine. This is very much kids' television for the post-punk generation. It's nihilistic and it's raw and it's savage. It's very gritty, it's very adult, and it's very, very disturbing. And all these years later, it's extremely powerful. And in some ways, it's telling a story which could, in some ways, be torn from today's headlines. So what's it about? Well, David Neal, very fine actor. He plays an ex-army officer, Norman Mortimer. He's determined to protect his family from the social and economic collapse that's engulfing the country. He's hard and a bit humorless, a no-nonsense patrician figure. If you didn't already know he was in the army, you would guess from his bearing and his manner. And the way he talks to people, he's very stiff and very mannered, very precise in his ways. He buys a large Victorian villa with huge cellars, and he sets about filling it with food and supplies, which he hopes will see his family through the current collapse, the current situation in a country that's rudderless, with no government to speak of, no sense of order, no sense of right. He takes the precaution of fortifying the house against outside attack, and the family, with some reluctance in some cases, hunker down to prepare for the worst. His wife May, played by Jean Rimmer, and his children, including Barry, played by Simon Gibbs Kent, who just a few months earlier had appeared in one of Doctor Who's less acclaimed serials, The Horns of Nimon, and Nessie, played by actress Annette Ekblom, who would later appear in two separate occasions, two separate roles in Brookside, the seminal Liverpool-based Channel 4 soap opera. They have misgivings and some doubts, and they believe that the supplies that they have should be shared equally. It should be share and share alike. Nobody should have priority. Nobody should take precedence. It's a difficult situation, and everyone in the British tradition should be pulling together to get through this time of adversity. Nessie, for her part, gets involved with an organisation which does just this. It's the Share Alike organisation. She teams up with her boyfriend Terry, played by Alan Lewis, and Cliff, played by Christopher Fairbank, who was only a few years away at this point from his defining role as Moxie in Auf Wiedersehen Pet. And they try to gather up the supplies that they can and pass them out amongst the population who are starving and unable to get hold of food. This is a time of extraordinary inflation, but people are earning vast amounts of money, but food is scarce, supplies are scarce, and there is this strange sensation that this is a country that's sliding towards extinction with nobody with the power or ability to turn things round. As these 7 episodes wear on, the schisms in the family become a little bit wider and a bit more uncomfortable. Nessie clashes with her father time and time again, particularly when he installs into the family his former boss, Mr. Gerald, played by Jack May. You may remember him from Adam Adamant Lives back in the 60s. The situation gets worse and worse, particularly when a black market racketeer, Vince Holloway, played by Mike Reid from EastEnders, becomes aware that there are some very precious resources hidden in the house's cellar. One of the many things that's interesting about Noah's Castle is the fact that it presents a microcosm of a situation that's ongoing. It doesn't have a beginning, middle and an end. The situation isn't resolved at the end. The situation is still ongoing. But the particular story that we focus on comes to a head in the final episode. And it's interesting that there's no happy ending. The series ends as bleakly as it begins, with the country still out of control, people out of control, people taking what they want because they want it. This series was an absolute revelation for me. I could not believe how good this was, and my first and immediate thought was, wow, this is very different from the stuff I watched as a kid, which was escapist, fantasy, colourful adventure, science fiction. This is dystopian, and it reflects that feel of the grey, drab, desperately pessimistic 1970s, which was reflected in so much of the television. Back in the 60s, we had exciting, vibrant, escapist TV, which promised us a world of colour and excitement. All those ITC adventure shows, Randall and Hopkirk, The Champions, The Saint, the American shows, Star Trek, all these shows which were upbeat and positive and crackling with life and energy. They reflected the 60s, but the 60s turned very slowly into the 70s, where things were slightly less optimistic and things were harder and tougher, and people had to face the realities of life and set aside, if you like, the childish things that entertained them in the 1960s. So TV became grimmer. There were more hard cop shows and detective shows, moving away from the slightly camp and fantastical shows of the 60s to reflect the world that people were living in. Things were harder, things were tougher. And in our fantasy shows, we saw that very often reflected in things like Survivors in the 1970s, William Greatrex's 1990 series for BBC Two, which depicted a sort of totalitarian state, as indeed did ITV's show The Guardians, about a vicious regime that ruled with a jackboot. And that's very much reflected in this. This is a junior version of that sort of thing. But in many ways, it's just as adult as any of those shows. This is very tough stuff. It's very tough viewing. You watch it now with a bit of a jolt because you're not used to seeing something like this for children. I mean, it's made for children, but it doesn't pull any punches. It deals with extremely adult themes in places. It puts in front of its young audience difficult drama and difficult situations, characters struggling in an appalling situation. It also gives us, in Jack May's character, Mr. Gerald, one of the most detestable and vile characters I think I've ever seen on television. He is Norman's boss. Norman works in this sort of shoe shop, which is running out of customers because nobody's got the money to pay extortionate prices for produce. Mr. Gerald ingratiates himself into the Mortimer household, and whilst he's only expected to be there for a short while, he quickly starts to rule the roost. He's an absolute monster. He really is terrible. He shouts and barks his orders. He wants his dinner. He wants his breakfast. He wants everything hand delivered to him. He doesn't respect anybody, and consequently they don't respect him. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his vile character are the advances that he makes to Nessie, played by Annette Ekblom. He wants to take her out to the theatre. He's got tickets to a theatre show, and he's persistent in pestering her and leering at her. And it's not explicitly stated, but it's quite clear what this horrible old man wants to do with Nessie. And it's very brave of a show like this, aimed at a younger audience, to address issues like this about this awful man. And there are suggestions of other slightly disturbing things as well when he sort of spies upon Nessie's younger sister. His behaviour is just intolerable and really is utterly detestable. He's thoroughly horrible, sleazy grotesquerie of a man. Really, it's an incredible performance from Jack May, but it's a character that you learn to hate very, very quickly. And what's interesting as well, I think, about the sort of character progression in the series is that Norman, the father, he sort of realises that Mr. Gerald isn't who he hoped he would be, and he starts to turn himself as the series rolls on. He becomes a little bit softer, a little bit more sympathetic to those members of his family who don't share his view of things. But he's in an unfortunate position because Mr. Gerald knows about the stocks that Norman is squirreling away in the cellar. And we hear throughout the series that it's considered a criminal offence to be a hoarder. And Norman realises that if he does anything to upset Mr. Gerald or try to evict him from the house, Mr. Gerald will go straight to the authorities and the whole family will be in trouble. This is such a strong series. I mean, the imagery in it is striking. This is largely filmed, I think, on location around Southampton, I would imagine, because it's a southern TV show with a lot of studio-based stuff. The acting is a little mannered in places, I think, particularly in the studio sequences, but I think that adds to the slightly disconcerting effect of the whole drama. It's set in a world that we don't want to be in, and people are behaving slightly unnaturally because it is a dreadful, hopeless situation. But the exterior scenes are really very well done indeed. They capture the decay of the streets. There's rubbish and litter in the streets. Concrete blocks filled with starving people. There are a few scenes of civil unrest, which you see reflected in the title sequence. One of them is shown there, of people just racing through the streets, setting fire to things, attacking vans. It's all low budget because you don't see vast amounts of rioting and stuff, but it's all done by suggestion. Over the end credit sequence, which is underscored by this deeply eerie electronic score by Jug Music, we get these sort of radio broadcasts over the credits at the end of the episodes that outline new things that are happening, new privations that are being imposed upon people, new laws that are being passed to try and maintain what's left of the social order. It's extremely gritty, grim stuff. I'm not going to say I enjoyed it, although I did, but I absolutely admired the craft of it and the way it was done on, as I said, doubtlessly a small children's TV budget, but the script is very mature. I mean, there are sequences that suggest that some young people have to resort to unpleasant things in order to earn enough food. Barry, one of Norman's sons, he befriends a young girl called Wendy, and she's just got no food. He tries to help her out, and he does at one point liberate some of his father's food supplies to give to the family. But earlier on, Wendy, who is, to be said, a rather plain girl, she says at one point, "I wish I was more attractive. I could help, I could get food." And the suggestion is that she would sell herself to get food to help herself and her mother, who incidentally is played by actress Pauline Letts, sister of former Doctor Who producer Barry Letts. This is a show that I finished watching it last week, and it's just been in my head for a little while, and mainly just thinking about how different it is to the shows that I watched as a kid, because by the late 1970s I wasn't a kid anymore, and the kids of that era and that generation had different things on their minds rather than being able to teleport and travel about and do magic tricks. They had the realities of what the 1970s had delivered upon their families to cope with, and all the unrest and the cultural changes and the upheavals. The 70s was an extraordinary time, really, and the way that it changed the country and changed the way we thought about the way we lived. It's a fantastic series. It's available on DVD, but you'll have to pay a few bob for it now because it's long since been deleted. I think it was released by Network. However, it's on YouTube, which is where I watched it, and there are some pretty good quality prints of it on there. So you can watch it without squinting, without going, what the hell's going on, because it's a good picture. So that's Noah's Castle, which I just thought was striking. Very, very strong piece of television. And the fact that it still has its power 45 years on says a lot about it. And unfortunately says a fair bit about the world we're in today, with everything that we hear on the news every day. Particularly at the moment, in relation to certain things, we do feel this sense that there's a growing sense of public discontentment, which is threatening to spill over into extreme violence at any moment. So, unfortunately, the world of Noah's Castle is a world that we're not that far away from. Once again, thank you to everybody who recommended this series. I would never have watched this without your recommendations. I'm so glad you pointed me in the direction of this underrated and forgotten piece of British television. Right, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, and if you're new here, then you need to do the likey and the subscribey and the QR code to stick around for loads more stuff on this channel. Coming up soon will be my films of the month for August 2025, and lots of stuff coming up in the next week or so. Hope this video hasn't been too disconcerting because of the background and the outside noises, but I will be back in the cinema room before long. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.